Instead of focusing on winning arguments, we're teaching the basic fundamentals of sales and marketing and how we can use them to win in the world of politics, teaching you how to meet people where they're at on the issues they care about. Welcome to The Brian Nichols Show. Well, hey there, folks. Welcome to today's episode of The Brian Nichols Show. I am, as always, your humble host, joining you from our lovely Cardio Miracle Studios here in sunny Eastern Indiana. We just finished the holidays, and you probably didn't eat the best of foods. Maybe your heart is being a little extra taxed, shall we say. Go ahead, give yourself the reinforcements you need with Cardio Miracle. Scan that little QR code over my shoulder, or simply head to cardiomiracle.com/TBNS. And you're going to know you're in the right spot. You're going to see a little notice at the top of your browser saying you're shopping with Brian Nichols, which means you're going to get 15% off your order at checkout. So yes, if you want to go ahead and lower your resting heart rate, lower your blood pressure while improving your pump at the gym, go ahead, check out Cardio Miracle. And also, we'll talk about Cardio Miracle later in today's episode in detail. But first, we're going to be going ahead and digging into all things Florida. And with that specifically, we're going to look at some legal stuffs, and namely, how do we actually balance this fine line between protecting the public while also protecting civil liberties. To discuss all that and more as someone who's running for Attorney General down in Florida, Steven Leskovich. Welcome to the Brian Nichols Show. How you doing?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you very much for having me here, Brian. I hope you had a wonderful Christmas and a great holiday season so far, but thank you for having me, and I'm doing wonderful down here.
Great to hear.
Florida.
For sure. No, and Merry Christmas right back at you. He is born. It is a great season to celebrate God's gift to the world, and I'm very blessed. I have a great Christmas with my family, so thank you for that. And I'm looking forward to today's conversation, because one of the things that popped up at the Christmas conversations is just this idea of public safety. There's still a lot of folks out there, and namely, I'm looking at my in-laws with the conversation we were having. They really are concerned with it seems to be this rising tide of just random acts of violence, right? And that's the part I think for a lot of folks, Stephen, they get very nervous just in general. Is there seems to be no rhyme or reason. We see the case that happened up in Charlotte, North Carolina, with Irina. I forget her last name, the Ukrainian girl who just out of nowhere, right, just completely taken by surprise by the African-American man that was behind her on the, I think it was the subway at the time, and he killed her, right? We saw what happened up in New York City. Thankfully, Daniel Penny was there to prevent that gentleman on the subway from causing any violence, but then he's looked at as the bad guy, right? So you see that there's this very weird yin and yang. There's some folks who seem to excuse the guy who did the horrible acts in Charlotte, and then they'll want to crucify the guy in Daniel Penny who's trying to stop bad things from happening. It's a weird world. So that's kind of the context I want to frame for today's conversation. But before we get there, do us a favor, Stephen. Just kind of give the Brian Nichols Show audience a little bit more introduction to who you are, a little bit more your story, and how you got yourself into this world of law where you're now running for Attorney General down in Florida. Sure,
Brian. I heard you say you're up in Eastern Indiana right now.
Yes, sir.
I am proud to say I'm from your neighbor there, from the great state of Ohio.
Okay.
So we have the Midwestern roots and everything else. When I was 7 years old, Brian, my family went to Washington, D.C., April 1981. And at that moment is when President Reagan was coming home from the hospital after the attempted assassination. My father was a history teacher, and I was always ingrained with understanding history. So I knew at that moment, it was a very inspiring moment to see President Reagan get out of his presidential limousine then to come home from the hospital.
His fight moment, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it left a lasting impression on me where I just knew that, even at 7 years old, there was a calling for me to do something different, to do something better. And that's what led me to the law. I knew I wanted to get involved in public service at a very young age. My family was involved in it, and just knew that was something that I had to do. I always wanted to get involved in, whether it was elected office, whether it was campaigning, whatever else it may be, but just had this calling that I knew I had to go to law school. And that's where I tailored my entire academic career for, was getting into the law. So it started in 1993 when I graduated high school, went to Kent State University there in Ohio, learned all about the May 4th, 1970 shooting and the first true unfortunate school shooting that this country had.
Yep.
And learning the history about it and how the National Guard got involved and everything else. And leading to it, just led me to this compelling, there's got to be something done with gun safety, with gun violence, with, any type of public safety regarding our society. And then went off to law school in the state up north there of Ohio, and then made my way down here.
And let's go back to the teasing of the dinner conversations that I had, and I'm sure millions of other Americans had, and specifically I'm sure Floridians had, right? And that is, again, the rising tide of random acts of violence. So let's just transition specifically to kind of where your campaign is going to be really having some impact, right? For Floridians, but I also think Florida is one of those states, Steven, that leads by, they kind of lead the way, and then the other states will follow by example, right? And I think back to COVID as a prime example. Ron DeSantis was down there saying, hey, I don't think this approach to dealing with COVID is the right approach. We're going to do things differently. And took the slings and arrows and ended up being the right answer. And other states followed suit, right? So I see that. I think Florida much, in that regards, will lead the way in other areas as well. So let's talk about that concern from the public of rising acts of violence. What would your approach to dealing with that actually look like from a tangible perspective? Because I hear a lot of folks, especially in the more progressive left, they'll offer platitudes, right? It's social justice, it's equity, it's equality, it's whatever, mental health, it's and you go through the buzzwords of the day. So what would it, from a tangible standpoint, look like in your world dealing with those random acts of violence?
Brian, to me, in 19, so I have to give you a little bit of context with this.
Please do.
So through my 26 years of being an attorney here in Florida, I've been a prosecutor, I've been a defense attorney, I'm currently an interim city attorney, I'm an elected official here in Charlotte County on the airport authority. So I've seen and have been around numerous different types of people, whether it be socioeconomic, sociocultural, and there's a lot of different mentalities that are going on. And I completely agree with you that we have two different factions that have formed over here recently, not just in Florida, but nationally as well, where you've got some people that are diametrically on the left, some people that are on the diametrically to the right, but there's got to be this common ground. The luxury of the law is supposed to be colorblind. The law is supposed to help everybody. The law is supposed to be equal justice under the Constitution. And I may have a political view that is completely diametrically opposite than what the legal view is. But you have to be able to separate yourself. So when you hear people saying it's mental health, it's gun violence, it's gun control, it's whatever else the issue may be, or it might be we're not being too tough, or that we're not being tough enough, so it all comes down to, in 1999, I went back to school, got my degree in organizational psychology from the University of Southern California, a traditionally liberal-leaning state, of course. But it wasn't about the state as it was about the philosophy on the psychological end of the law. So the important thing is when it comes to the law, you have to be able to understand, there's the people to the right, there's the people to the left, and I came up with the acronym, the TRI-C. So in order to understand what's going on, Brian, you have to be able to collaborate with people, you have to be able to communicate with people, and you have to be able to cooperate with people.
Tell us more. Yeah, I want to learn more about
So
that.
what I mean by this is, and like we've all had our childhood friends. And when I was growing up, we always called them my peeps, P-E-E-P-S. And what that stands for is you have to be able to understand people psychologically, economically, educationally, politically, and socially. if you can't understand those factions, if you can't understand those purviews of what your society is going through, then you're either going to have an ideology to the right or an ideology to the left. So I've taken a psychological approach to the practice of law and through my legal career and put it into writing, putting it into thesis, putting it into my dissertation, and have encompassed that through this. So when it comes to the collaboration, communication, and cooperation, in cooperation with the PEEPS program as well, you have to be able to say, hey, I may personally disagree with this point of view, but here's what the law says.
Mm-hmm.
The law is meant to protect everybody. And I've seen across the country, some people are just throwing down their political ideologies down our throat, which is not good, because then you're completely eliminating half of society. Or you may turn around and say, well, we're going to do this regardless if it's right or wrong. We're going to do it anyways because it's what I think is right.
All right, it's the holidays, which means we're all doing that annual dance, pretending that we love this time of year, while secretly we're running on stress, sugar, and whatever's left of our sanity. You've got the office parties, the family gatherings, the flights, the long lines, the weird cookie that Aunt Carol made, and on top of that, the weather's colder, you're eating heavier, you're sleeping less, and your immune system is basically sending you texts saying like, hey buddy, I'm not okay. And let's be real, December has a way of exposing everything your body has already been struggling with. Low energy, amplified. Brain fog, doubled. Circulation, frozen like your car windshield. And don't even get me started on inflammation after you've had your 5th helping of just a little more at dinner. See, that's where Cardio Miracle comes in. It gives your body that one thing the holidays steal the most, nitric oxide. And nitric oxide is actually what helps the blood flow. It helps oxygen reach your cells, support your immune system, and helps your body bounce back from the stress, the sugar, the travel, the cold weather, all of it. And I've been drinking it every day, morning and night, because I don't have time to crash halfway through the month. And Cardio Miracle keeps me steady, clear-headed, energized, and able to actually enjoy the holidays instead of just survive them. So if you want to give yourself the gift of not feeling like you're worn out at Christmas, just go ahead and scan the QR code over my shoulder, click that little link in the show notes, or visit cardiomiracle.com/TBNS to grab yours. And by the way, you'll get 15% off at checkout. And now, let's get back to the show.
That's not the way the law is supposed to happen. That's not the way that our society is supposed to happen.
And really quick, Steve, I want to laser focus on that, because we have seen this pop up quite a bit where, especially in areas where I lived, like I lived in deep blue Philadelphia for just under a decade. And we saw what was legal, right, not necessarily always be what was right. So like we had Larry Krasner as the DA in Philadelphia, and he was more or less just a traditional Soros-backed progressive DA. And kind of in the spirit of what you were talking about earlier, he was much more like philosophically focused, right? Like he's focused more on the equity, the equality, the inclusion, more of that kind of a perspective versus actually following the law. So you see that though, but like then the law kind of does follow though. Like you see Philadelphia start to pass laws that become much more progressive in nature. So if, let's just say, there was a big change and all of a sudden you had a very conservative DA come into office, and now he's facing these, like I would say almost like illegal laws, even though that's an oxymoron, because if it's a law, it's a law. But if it's a law that's violating people's like their rights, their constitutional rights, like whether it's Second Amendment or limiting free speech or whatever it may be, is there not a responsibility to stand up and fight back against those unjust, unconstitutional laws?
There is. I completely agree with you. Yes, there is. But when it comes to the law, though, Brian, you have to go through the process. You can't just say, we're going to disobey this law because I don't like it. Now, personally, I may not like a law. I like going 75 miles an hour driving in a 35-mile-an-hour zone. But I know if I do that, I'm probably going to get pulled over and I'm probably going to get a speeding ticket. But you can't just come in and say, hey, especially when it comes to the law, especially whether it's the DA's office, the state attorney's office, whether it's the Department of Justice, you can't just come in and say, I don't like this law, therefore it's no longer a good law. There has to be a process to go through. And what we're seeing here nationally and in Florida is individuals are taking the matters into their own hands and saying, this law is not good because I don't like it, because it doesn't have the Christian, values. It doesn't have the parent right values. It doesn't have
can you give us some
values that are coming about. So you have to go through the process. You have to go through the court system with it.
Steven, can you give us some examples though of that, like where you're seeing like actual like instances where people are putting personal principles and such over the law in Florida? I'm just curious what that looks like.
All right. So I am a huge gun advocate. I own multiple firearms, semi-automatic rifles, semi-automatic pistols. I own, revolvers, whatever. And I love going out shooting. Florida had a law that said, you couldn't, you could not open carry a firearm. A lot of states have the open carry. So here recently, the District Court of Appeals said, well, we think it's unconstitutional.
Mm-hmm.
As an attorney general, if a court says we believe it's unconstitutional, you have a duty, you have an elected duty, you have a legal duty, you have a moral duty to take the case to the Florida Supreme Court. You have to, because you are there to defend the laws. And whether I like the laws or not, I think we should have open carry in the state of Florida, my personal view. But the law said you couldn't do it. Our attorney general came out and said, I'm not going to appeal it to the Florida Supreme Court, and we're just going to let it die. So you have a separation of powers problem. Who's in control now? Is it the executive branch? Is it the legislative branch? So whether you're the DA, whether you're the state attorney, the attorney general, you have to go through the process. You have to. That's your elected duty, and that's what our three previous attorney generals did. Pam Bondi and Ashley Moody did. I don't like this law. I hate it, but it's the law. The legislators made it. So if we don't like it, they have to correct it, unless the court system deems it as you go through the process.
Interesting. So what about those who say, going back to the Schoolhouse Rock version of politics, where, you have the laws created by Congress, right? So
Mm-hmm.
they're the legislative branch, they're the ones who create laws. Then you have the judicial branch, they interpret the laws, and then you have the the executive branch who enforces the laws. So
Yeah.
I guess technically you're underneath that executive branch. So I think there's some folks who might say, well, isn't it okay then to not enforce certain laws, to use that executive discretion? What does that look like?
Well, and let me give you this type of an example, okay? So our attorney general turned around and said, we're not going to enforce this law. The state said, or, a district court of appeals said, a lower court said it's unconstitutional. That's one avenue. Suppose we get this George Soros left-wing crazy nut that comes in as the Florida attorney general. Florida has a 6-week abortion ban. I can only imagine, and I'm just speculating here, Brian, some left-wing nut comes in and says, you know what? I don't like the 6-week abortion ban. I think it's unconstitutional, so we're not going to enforce it. So now you have this situation where you're taking your political ideologies
Mm-hmm.
and you're doing your will as opposed to what the will of the voters had done, doing what the will of the legislators had done. And you potentially have a situation where this left-leaning crazy nut comes in and, you know what? I think abortion should be legal up until the day of birth. So we're not going to enforce this law. So now, you're basically circumventing the entire legal process and getting rid of the legislative branch by doing what you want to do personally. And that's where part of the problem comes in, not just here in Florida, but nationally as well. So to me, that's why the Tri-C becomes very important, that you have to collaborate, you have to communicate, you have to cooperate. Whether it's with the legislators, whether it's with the local community, whatever it may be. And you have to be able to understand it's the law. We don't like the laws that we have. Some we love, some, and some we just hate, but you have to be conscious of being able to understand them.
What would you say to folks who make the argument that, well, because it's allowed, technically that goes under the jurisdiction of their, in this case, the attorney general's, their right to exercise that decision, right? To not enforce, because otherwise, hey, legislator, make it so it's illegal, right? Like use your legislative powers and make it so it's illegal that they can't, just willy-nilly enforce certain laws or not enforce certain laws.
Oh, listen, and that's an awesome point right there. But if you have a left-wing Democratic attorney general who says we're not going to enforce the laws, and then let's say hypothetically 4 years later, the correct individual who happens to be very conservative gets elected, we're going to have, during the 4-year administration here, these laws don't apply. They're unenforceable. 4 years later, we're going to say they're enforceable, and you have this back and forth teetering. So it creates this problem of, what are we actually going to do? The correct route would be, hey, I believe this law is unconstitutional. I don't like this law. And you start advocating to the legislators, you start advocating to the voters, whether it's a constitutional amendment, and saying, we need to change this law, and here's why. You can't just do it unless the court system turns around and says it's unconstitutional statewide.
Who are some folks that you look to as either attorney generals past, either in in the state office or in national office, that you really would look to as people you would maybe want to model your approach to being an attorney general after?
Well, here recently we had Ashley Moody as our attorney general. She was elected first 2018. I met her when she was campaigning in 2018. She was a former federal prosecutor, a former judge, and just understood the role. She wasn't there about making headlines. She wasn't there about, going out every day on, no offense, Brian, on podcasts. She wasn't there to be in the media. She was there to do her job. She understood, what needed to be done, because as the attorney general, you have to, of course, prosecute all violent crimes, all criminal crimes that are statewide. You have to defend the state in all legal appeals. You have to defend the state's waters, lands, and parks. So, any type of civil appeals. So there's a lot that goes into it. I think Ashley Moody would be the first and foremost, because she was there recently. Just before her was Pam Bondi. I had all the respect in the world, and still do, for Pam Bondi as well, because they got it. They were actually courtroom lawyers. They were actually courtroom judges. They actually knew the law. Experience does matter. There's a few exceptions, just, that are just here and there. But Senator Moody, well, she's now Senator Moody because she got elevated when Marco Rubio went to become the Secretary of State. But Ashley Moody got it. She had been in the courtroom for decades. Pam Bondi got it. She actually did trials and understood it. That's where kind of my experience comes in as well. That you have to be a peacemaker. You have to be when it comes to the law. That doesn't mean I have to agree with you. You and I can get into a heated debate, a heated argument, have completely opposite ends of our clients' perspectives, and then 20 minutes later be out on the golf course and having a good time. That's what the law is supposed to be about. But Ashley Moody is someone that I would really look out to. Although Rick Scott, our former governor, now senator, was not the attorney general, he certainly is an attorney. Did a fantastic job here. I would reach out to him as well. But those are folks that I would, really lean on to.
So back in 2020, I mentioned earlier, your governor, Ron DeSantis, was really the governor that helped kind of lead the charge against the COVID regime and tyranny there, especially during the Biden administration. But I will give credit where credit's due as well. He also stood up against Republican leadership in the Trump administration back during the height of COVID in 2020 before the election, and was really leading the charge there by example. But people forget how close it was to not having Ron DeSantis as governor of Florida, how Andrew Gillum was this close to becoming the next governor. And we had Philip, Philip, his name escapes me. I can't believe I'm forgetting his name. But he was episode 200, I believe. And he helped with the marketing campaign down in Florida to help get Ron DeSantis elected. But neither here nor there. We dug into the actual the campaign itself and how close it was. Yep. And I say all that, like, I look at someone like a Ron DeSantis. There are definitely areas that I disagree with Ron DeSantis, much to your point. Like, we can have disagreements, but I can still look and say, you did awesome in these areas. But I'm just curious, kind of your temperature check on the Ron DeSantis governorship. Obviously he had an exploratorial, it's like Dora the Explorer, but exploratory. I have a 2.5-year-old, so you can tell I'm in dad mode still. But like when you look at somebody like a Ron DeSantis, kind of what was your overall vibe with him? Give him a score if you want it, like on a through F. I'm just curious, kind of what your overall perspective on his overall administration has been.
I would give him an A-. And the only reason I'd give him an A- is exactly for what you said, Brian. I think Ron DeSantis has been a fantastic governor for Florida. I think he has led the country in he has led the state, which has then incorporated and helped influence other states here in the country as well. Whether it's, during COVID, whether it's with immigration, he's done a phenomenal, fantastic job. He took on issues that some states weren't willing to do. But there are some points that I do disagree on with him. I think the end goal that Ron DeSantis and I would have would be the same, but it's the process on how to get there would be differently. Overall, he's been a fantastic governor. He's done a lot of great things for this state. And it's unfortunate that his tenure is going to be coming to an end here in a year, but I wish him the best and the most of luck moving forward.
So I don't mean to bring you into this conversation, but you mentioned Pam Bondi. She was very pivotal in the conversation around the Epstein files. Actually, the Epstein files should go back to the Florida judicial system, I believe, where he was originally tried. So there's a lot around that. I'm just curious, what's been your overall vibe as a somebody in the legal world around the handling of the Epstein case thus far?
The whole thing is a debacle, and it started back when he was prosecuted here in South Florida. The charges were reduced. He got a smack on the wrist, and he was able to go free. He didn't have to register as a sex offender, or as a sexual predator. So the whole debacle started there. But I find it curious, Brian, how when President Trump was first in office during his 45th term, that the Epstein files became this huge, media frenzy, whatever, or just whatever you may want to call it. During the next 4 years under President Biden, it appeared that it kind of slowed off a little bit, and the Democratic-leaning folks weren't calling for all the release of everything. Trump comes back into office. They want him to have everything released. So my understanding, and this is just my opinion, Brian, the whole thing is a debacle. The whole thing is a mess. I understand that there's thousands, if not tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of documents that need to be redacted. But with today's modern technology, with AI coming through, it shouldn't take years to redact documents. You're looking for victims' names, you're looking for victims' addresses. I was on AI the other day.
I was just going to say, we're in the era of AI. Come on.
I was just on AI the other day, and my office manager said to me, "Hey, can you draft something up for me real quick?" I grabbed 4 documents, put it in, and said, redact this, this, and this out. And within, 30 seconds, I have my document and all the names are blacked out.
Yep.
Now I'm not saying that, that's the way that, that the DOJ needs to do it, but come on now, it's been 2018 or 19 when he got arrested. Okay. I understand while he was going through the system, you're not going to release things.
Right. 8 years later.
8 years later. After he's deceased and after Ghislaine Maxwell is now incarcerated, you had to be aware there was going to be some kind of public information request, some kind of FOIA request. Start redacting the crap. To me, it's better to just redact it, be done with it, get it out, and get it behind you. But it appears that whether it's coming directly from AG Bondi or not, or whether it's coming from someone lower, that there seems to be a stalling component to it. You were court ordered to release all of them. And then if I'm not mistaken, I think I read yesterday or the day before, the DOJ found another 100 and some odd thousand documents or that weren't known. And I'm like, come on, they've got these documents. Yeah, exactly. They've got these documents at Fort Knox, not literally, but figuratively. And they know exactly what there is. Just release it.
Yep.
Be done with it. Get it over with.
This leads to the distrust, right? This is why there are so many people who are jaded with the system. Yeah. And this is what we've been talking about here on the show for a number of years at this point, is like, especially during COVID, when you start to gaslight people, they instantly will just lead with, I don't believe you. Prove to me what you're saying is true, versus I'll trust you and then I'm going to verify, right? That's the flip that's happened over the past 5 years. And we've seen a lot of folks in government and the bureaucracies in the expert class, they haven't realized this yet. And I think your approach that you're outlining here of, listen, I have my own biases. I'm going to acknowledge my own biases, but I'm going to follow the letter of the law. I think that's actually a very compelling sales pitch to a voter base, right? Because at the end of the day, the voter base, they are looking for someone they can cast their vote for that they are not going to regret later, right? And anybody who voted for Trump right now, like, I'm not trying to make you, condemn him or not, but like, there are a lot of folks who they look at their vote and they say, it's not that I regret my vote, but my goodness, I'm a little disappointed, right? And just the disappointment going into that leads folks saying, well, am I going to have that same umption to go vote in the future? And that's why the 26 midterms aren't looking too hot for the GOP. So I think the approach you're taking, Steven, is actually, it's very refreshing. And a lot of voters will be compelled to listen to your campaign and your candidacy. So with all that being said, I would be remiss if I did not give you the last word here. So bring us home. What would you like folks to take away from today's conversation? And of course, where can folks go ahead, learn more about the campaign if they want to go ahead and maybe give you some hard-earned dollars to go and help support the campaign? Of course, where can they go ahead and do that as well? Steven, the floor is yours.
All right. Well, Brian, thank you very much for having me on your show today. It's been fantastic to be able to tell people, especially this time of the year, of what's going on. People are fed up with politics right now.
Yep.
They're, because they're all about family, they're all about the holidays, and let's just turn the year. So to me, it's about, being a peacemaker. It's not about curtailing to any particular side. It's about, look, I have my strong biases over here. And I admit that, and I acknowledge that, and I'm not afraid to say it. I also understand that it's not to appease anybody else. It's just, look, here, it's like being a peacemaker, Brian. You have to be able to, you have to be able to collaborate, communicate, and cooperate with people. You have to.
All right,
so
Steven.
We are moving forward. We're having a great time with things. It's been great meeting people. You can go to our website at leskovichforflorida.com. You can go to believewithsteve.org. You can go to letsgolesco.org. You can go to movingfloridaforward.org. They're all going to take you to the exact same place. You're able to donate there. And again, Brian, I look forward to winning this election. I look forward to helping people. I look forward not just here locally, but also statewide as well as nationally, trying to bring people back into the consciousness of the law.
Steven Leskovich. The link will be in the show notes for the website, folks. If you want to go ahead and support Steven's campaign, of course, you can go ahead and do so there. And if you have some questions, please reach out to Steven. And of course, let him know you heard him here on the Brian Nichols Show. With that being said, though, folks, we are going to go ahead and put a pin in today's conversation. If you got some enjoyment from today's conversation and some value, please, of course, give it a share when you do tag yours truly at @BNicholsLiberty. You can find me on X, Facebook, or Instagram. And as for the Brian Nichols Show, wherever you watch or listen to your favorite video or audio content, you can find the Brian Nichols Show. So we're over on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, on Rumble, YouTube, Facebook, X, wherever it is. Just hit that subscribe button, because every Monday, Thursday, and Friday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern, we have a brand new episode hitting your feeds that I guarantee will leave you educated, enlightened, and informed. But with that being said, we're going to go ahead and say goodbye. So Brian Nichols signing off here on the Brian Nichols Show for Steven Leskovich. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to The Brian Nichols Show. Find more episodes at briannicholsshow.com.